The unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. So today we just had a good ceremony for remembering people that have died in war, directly or indirectly, which is a very solemn ceremony for us, and also just solemn memories that come to my mind anyway. And what I want to talk about today is something that is along those lines, but something that we can all relate to, assuming that we all have not been directly affected by war. And the thing I want to discuss a little bit is, because it's a big topic, is how to turn difficult situations into doing Buddhist practice. And what I'm talking about is not necessarily war, but things that are not like going to the store and seeing that they've run out of your favorite toothpaste. You know, some people can say that as a difficult situation. Or that you find out that no longer are they going to carry your favorite toothpaste, you know. There's something that, daily life can get us into these modes of thinking that this is really, those kinds of things are really a big deal. But what I want to discuss is difficult situations that are life-changing and are not common. And we do, I don't know about all of us, but I think sooner or later we come up into things that are really, I think maybe the first thought is that whatever I'm facing, a situation that arises, is something that is much bigger than I am. And of course our first impulse, or mine is to see how I can control it, how I can fix it, how I can make it better, how I can change it into something that is more acceptable. And sometimes situations are so big and so understandable that we just can't get a grip on them in that way. And I don't think there's any fault in what we do in trying to understand things in this way, because that's how we survive. We try to make sense out of situations so that we can then move into them in a way that we do as part of living our lives. But sometimes it's just, they're too big. And I'm thinking about being diagnosed with a terminal illness. I'm thinking about maybe being in debt in an overwhelming way. I'm thinking about, let's see here. Well, I have two stories, and I won't going to tell you about them at the moment. But you know what I'm saying? Just really big events that are just more than we can make sense out of. And what often happens in this kind of a situation is that we can be really confused. What is good to do? I have no idea. What should I do? I have no idea. And it can just go around and around. So it's hard to know what to do, how to make a step towards doing something. Anything, sometimes it feels like anything will be better than just sitting in that confusion. Part of it is that we don't even know that we're confused. Sometimes we can think we know what to do, and it can take us a while to realize that we really don't. But after a while, with any really luck, we can realize or accept or understand that we are confused. that we don't know what to do. And in the Buddhist world, this is not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with us because we don't know what to do. In fact, it's a really good step. And it can be really awkward, and it can be really hard to just be still within that confusion. But when you don't know what to do, you've tried everything you can think of to do, and it just simply doesn't make a dent in the situation or have any kind of, effective change to the situation. Well, then what? There you are, sitting in this kind of cloud of unknowing. But I do think that if the cloud is in front of us and we're looking at it from a distance, it looks a lot more formidable than if we're sitting in the midst of it. Neither one is comfortable, but there is something to be said for not pushing it away, especially if it's not something we can push away, as much as we try. And what I have found with Buddhist practice is there's a way to say, yes, I'm confused. Yes, I do not know what to do. And what we're effectively doing is we're stopping what we would just kind of automatically spin out to do into worry, the confusion, all the things that just we lash out, the hatred, the anger, all that kind of stuff. We can just stop. All of us can do that, really. We're not controlled all the time by our emotions, but we can stop. And what we can do is we can stop what we are doing, stop trying to fix a situation and reflect just a little bit. Oh, what might be good to do here? Am I really confused? Am I making a mess because of my ideas about what is good to do? Maybe I really don't know. And there's nothing wrong with that. I really don't know. The thing that happens with reflection is, and not knowing, is that things open up, believe it or not. Does that make sense? Because if you are carrying around a load of, I don't know what to do, this is awful, etc., I'm confused, I don't understand it, all that stuff, they are ideas that can obstruct. Those are the clouds. And if we sit still and reflect, it's surprising how many times things will just simply open up. And that's not with any kind of a preconceived idea of what that opening up is or what it will bring. It's based on faith, and it is a stepping into something that's unknown. Because believe it or not, all those worries that we carry with us and confusions are what we find comfort in a certain kind of way, because it's a knowable me. So, I'd like to tell you a story. Okay. This is a true story. It's about a boy named Jacques. He's 7 years old. At school, one day, another boy and he were running outside to play, when the other boy accidentally ran into Jacques, and Jacques, who had glasses on his head, hit the teacher's desk. His glasses frame on one side angled itself in such a way that it penetrated his one eye. He's 7 years old. He had surgery which did some repair to the damage, but he was blind at a very young age. The other eye also went blind because the blow to the head was so strong. So in an instant, his life changed big time, in his young life. And so he writes, "It was a great surprise to me to find myself blind. And being blind was not at all as I imagined it." A clue. Nor was it as the people around me seemed to think it, because they didn't know what it was like to be blind, but they were trying to help, fair enough. They told me that blind that to be blind meant to not see. Okay. After the accident, I wanted to use my eyes. I followed the usual path. I looked in the directions where I was in the habit of seeing before the accident, and there was anguish, a lack of something, like a void, which filled me with what grown-ups call despair. Finally, one day I realized that I was looking in the wrong direction. It is simple as that. Pause, stop, reflect, open, and look, and step forward. I was making something very like the mistake people who change their glasses without adjusting themselves. And I think we all, or a lot of us, know about that. I was looking too far off and too much on the surface of things. In other words, he recognized his confusion, and he didn't know what to do. This was much more than a discovery, it was a revelation. So he knew at this young age that actually it was more than just an insight of he was confused. It wasn't just a negative statement. He was opening himself up. I knew that I couldn't have a view as I did before I became blind. It was not working. So I threw myself forward into substance, which was space. What in the world does that mean? Well, he did it. Okay. But which I did not recognize because it no longer held anything familiar to me. In other words, he really threw himself into not knowing, and was willing to sit within that cloud of confusion and despair, and to see. He just felt like that was the choice that he was making right at that point, and he went for it. Immediately, the substance of the universe drew together, redefined, and peopled itself anew. In other words, it was grounded in real life. He wasn't up in a cloud of love and light. And then he says, I was aware of a radiance emanating from a place I knew nothing about, a place which might as well have been outside me as within, but was there, or to put it more precisely, it was light. Later on he writes, if instead of letting myself be carried by confidence in this new view and throwing myself into things, I hesitated, calculated, thought about the wall, understanding he's blind, trying to make his way through his world, thought about the wall, the half-open door, the key in the lock, if I said to myself all these things were hostile and about to strike or scratch, then without fail I hit or wounded myself. He stopped what he was doing, which was seeing the world as he once knew, and what others were telling him was a true view. So he had to kind of strike out on his own and make his own way without having any idea what that meant. Then he realized his view of the world that he had held for so long was wrong. His thoughts about looking through glasses in the old way just wasn't working for him as a blind person. You kind of go, duh. But it takes us a while to learn things like this and to see that what we're doing is our view is just a mistaken view. It's not like a really bad thing. It's just that we're looking at things in a way that perhaps isn't as helpful as it was before. Not a bad thing. We're not bad people. He let go of old ideas without preconceived ideas about what would come next. And that's how his world changed, his worldview changed by doing that. He lived for many years after that accident and learned how to live a different way with a different view, and he was blind for the rest of his life. And this is based on a true story. Confusion caused him harm. But he paused and he reflected on his situation, was able to let go, and he allowed a new view to come in. And that wasn't the end of it. he tested that new view out. Because a new view doesn't always mean like it's the answer that's going to hold. In this situation it happened, it was. But he found that his new view was very helpful. Because he no longer was trying to fight with things, but he was being with things more. Right? And it seemed to have a shift in his view, so that the fighting was, I doubt if it's absent all the time, but it was lessened so that he knew how to move through the world. So it was a clue if he started to get, what was the word, calculating, trying to figure things out, hostile, thinking things were hostile, and he knew that was not a good way to go. He could drop that and move into, throwing himself into space, whatever that means. But whatever it was, it worked for him. Okay, let's see here. And so that's one story. I like stories because they can really illustrate things well. The next story is a different story. This story is about finding faith, but it's still about a really, really difficult situation. This is a prisoner's story, and this again is a real true story. And it's about a man named Ricky Jackson. This is true. And from the age of 18, he spent 39 years in an Ohio prison for a crime he didn't commit. Okay. Well, a lot of prisoners say that when they're in prison, but this has more to the story than that. He was convicted by the testimony of one witness, and this was a shaky witness at that, who was a 12-year-old newspaper boy who said that Ricky did commit the crime. In other words, he said he saw Ricky at the site of the crime, which was a murder. In 2014, they recalled the witness, this newspaper boy who had obviously grown up, and asked him again if what he had said was what he saw at the crime site. Well, it turned out that he had been forced by the police to come up with the story because they didn't have anybody else that could be a suspect for committing the crime. And he happened to be a black man, so it was just one of those things that kind of have to say, this happens in this country, and this is what happened in this case too. However, this has a good ending. So because of this newspaper boy grown-up's new testimony, Ricky was released from prison in 2014. 39 years in prison. And while he was in prison, he wasn't just, if he needed to fight, which I think you do need to fight in prison sometimes because the situation is really tough, then he would fight, and he spent quite a considerable amount of time in solitary confinement. So he wasn't able to make life in prison wonderful. However, when he started his journey in prison, he said to himself, Ricky Jackson says he is not a religious man. But even in his darkest moments in prison, he says, I had this ember inside me, something like smoldering piece of hope. I'd say, if I give up, what am I really surrendering to? Tough. When you're really surrounded by who knows what, probably a lot of really difficult situations, a lot of them. He said, if I give up, what am I surrendering to? And so you go on, he said. Ricky could see that surrendering to his darkest moments was a mistake. When he was in prison, he held to not doing it, which was an act of faith, because he did not have any other view that took its place at first. In other words, that smoldering light was, he says, some little smoldering piece of hope. That's not saying it's a great big grand view, but it was a little tiny smoldering ember. After 39 years, his situation changed. He was released and given a chance for a new start. So his faith carried him a long time, and he held to it. In a human world, if he got in fights or was in solitary confinement, he probably, didn't do it on a level that we might think is pure. He was probably quite human, like most of us would be in that kind of a situation. Let's see, I lost my place. There it is. So after he was released, and he found himself in a good living situation, so he said, I intend to live well, but it has nothing to do with whether I'm in this nice house, this is where the interview took place, or whether I'm homeless. It has to do with attitude. I have been given an opportunity, and I'm not going to waste it by holding grudges. So when he was released, he was able to start afresh, anew, without dragging all the stuff that had happened to him. For 39 years, he was a young adult, probably 18, I would say probably not very well developed, mentally, or, not very mature, not an adult, basically a child. And he was in the prison until he was 57 years old, so a big chunk of his life. So we could say, well, he would justify being, holding grudges, that's his life was basically taken away. But he said, no, it's just not worth. What are you surrendering to? Well, the despair, the anger, all that kind of stuff. He realized that wasn't worth surrendering to. And I find that is a very poignant example of turning around, or hope, really, is what I find in this story. And I asked myself this question. I said, well, I think we too are prisoners of our own thoughts and emotions. This isn't just for people in those kinds of difficult situations. And I said, if you don't think your own thoughts and emotions imprison you, you can ask yourself this question. Do any of my thoughts or emotions control what I do? Almost dictate what I do? And I would say, yeah, I can see that they do, and and I can say they're doing it less, and I can say there is a tendency for them to do that. And what is it that we can bring to those situations that could perhaps help us not be so dictated? Or what can help us say something like, if I give up, what am I really surrendering to? I think the key here is to pause, to stop, reflect, open, move into the openness, and see what happens. And here's a poem. Catching the wind with open hands, I bow my head with tear-filled eyes. Words drop away. My wish is for us all to find joy of pausing, stopping, reflecting, and moving into the openness. And here's a closing poem from William Blake, Auguries of Innocence, part of a poem. Man was made for joy and woe, and when this we rightly know, through the world we safely go. Joy and woe are woven fine, a clothing for the soul divine. Under every grief and pin runs a joy with a silken twine. Thank you.